We have all felt alone. And it's fair to say that we have all felt afraid. Perhaps even overwhelmed with haunting thoughts and anxieties that made us feel paranoid. It's a feeling like no other, that all too familiar feeling of dread and unease that is arguably not captured any better in a medium as choice-driven, interactive, and immersive as a video game. The horror genre of video games over the years haven't ceased to surprise, and Afraid of Monsters is no exception, with its vague, mysterious story and its dark, claustrophobic atmosphere that will surely remind players of that same familiar feeling, the feeling of dread and being afraid. Afraid of Monsters' Director's Cut, the last big update for the game released in October of 2007, is a horror survival title developed by Team Sskalar. The game began development in 2005 as a mod for the 1998 hit Half-Life, featuring enemies that were reskins of the latter, along with many confusing maps, shoddy weapons, and other issues that were completely fixed or redone in the director's cut, along with a myriad of gameplay changes and additions such as multiple endings. This latest version of the game is available for download on ModDB, with the game still requiring Half-Life 1 on Steam to play. Team Sskalar, mainly consisting of Andreas Romberg and James Merchant at the time, were heavily influenced by other survival horror titles such as earlier Resident Evils and Silent Hill, both with this project and their first lesser-known one, Resident Evil Cold Blood. This wouldn't be the last horror project that Team Sskalar would work on either, moving on to create the more critically acclaimed and well-known Cry of Fear. Of course, moving forward there will be many major spoilers for the game. I'd stop watching if you want to experience it for yourself, which is what I highly recommend. Let's get to it. You play as a mostly silent protagonist whose name is David Leatherhoff, and all that's made clear in the beginning is that he had to come to Markland Hospital to possibly seek help. Soon after we see him enter the bathroom, he gets sidetracked with his strange, unnamed medication, with frustration showing in his short monologue.
I really need to take these pills. I can't stop taking them. Damn it!
As he gathers his thoughts to go back outside, something is clearly wrong. Before we can get any answers, David wakes up dazed in the bathroom, proclaiming that he must have passed out. The mirror is busted out, and it's now nighttime outside with the hospital looking almost abandoned with no one else to be seen. As David wanders the hospital, collecting a knife and collecting keys for doors that are locked along the way, there are strange occurrences happening around him that are mostly too subtle to catch. Soon after finding a flashlight and dangerously making his way to the roof of the hospital just to get to the upper levels, David stumbles upon an obstacle that requires him to turn the power off to progress. On his way to the power room, he finds a handgun and he proceeds, and after that, nothing was the same for him ever again. This is a nightmare. There's monsters everywhere, wearing normal people clothing but acting far from friendly. He's gotta get out of here. What proceeds next involves David descending the hospital, having to go through some of the most claustrophobic of spaces to get down to the garage levels, all while facing threats that want to kill him. He quickly learns that to survive, he'll have to scavenge as much supplies as he can, finding ammo, batteries, and his pills. An important thing to note is that his pills are what apparently give him life, keeping him going in this hell. But it's important to question whether the pills actually keep him going. David makes his way out of the garage into the city, where he doesn't know what to expect. It seems as if these freaks won't stop coming after him. He kills and runs his way through many alleyways, subways, and sewer systems, but it appears as if he's running in circles, unable to escape what appears to be an unexplainable mess. The more he ventures, the more his mind seems to bend and exaggerate reality around him, pushing and pulling him to the deepest, darkest underbellies of the city, with the monsters strengthening their assault. Nearer to the latter half of the story, David typically keeps fighting his way through the city until he reaches a garage with a car, which he steals and uses to try and escape the seemingly godforsaken town. But it seems as if his feverish mind only becomes more disturbed with time, sending him off the road and into a tree in the middle of the woods. Within these dark, foreboding woods, David will then wander into one of the last coherent locations in the game, a creepy-ass mansion. When progressing beyond the end of the mansion, it's clear that David's sanity is stooping to its lowest point, with the architecture and atmosphere becoming more abrasive and chaotic. The walls are bleeding. There's cages chained and hanging from an endless ceiling. There are ceiling lights hanging on the floor and the walls, and the monsters whose appearance now blends in the environment are more ferocious than ever. And there are tortured cries and screams throughout this chaotic, personal hell. At the end of all this chaos is nothing but a tunnel with a white light shining in the end. But before you can reach it, the whole time, David's been murdering innocent civilians, and he's finally been taken into custody. This is the canonical first ending. There are 4 endings in total, with the second and third ending requiring a little more vigilance to catch and follow, starting on a more hidden path and taking David through many new underbellies of the city, while some more familiar areas he encounters again consist of more subtle map changes and different enemy placements to catch you off guard. With the second and third endings, you end up in the same tunnel with the white light, venturing further toward the light in the second ending and a lot further in the third. The second ending consists of David being questioned by police, with David explaining that he doesn't remember much at all. In the third ending, police find that David has hung himself in his cell. It appears as if each ending is falling chronologically, but the fourth and final true ending is nothing like before. In order to get the fourth ending, you must find 10 pages that all have a letter and a number written on them, with all the pages scattered meticulously throughout the 3 previous runs of the game. The easiest way to collect and archive these pages is to screenshot them or write them down. Once all these pages' characters are assembled and rearranged, you will get the phrase "Forgive me," which acts as a sequence for the numbers you must press in order on the walls in the specific passworded room at the end of the game in order to open the fourth ending door. Where does it lead? After all of the horrors that David has endured on his treacherous journey, it's finally coming full circle. In the moment, David thought his enemies surrounded him, but in reality, the enemy was within him. The time has finally come for David to fight the true monster, the one that's feeding this vicious cycle of fear and misery. The true villain is his addiction. A life he most likely led, without having to be alone and afraid, was destroyed by his addiction to drugs, specifically with those unnamed pills. It all started with the pills. It's always been the pills. But now, David is arguably stronger than he's ever been because of all that he's fought and been through. He's ventured through the most horrific of places and defeated every vile monster that mentally stood in his way. He's going to take control of his life again. He's going to... In this true ending, David overdosed on his pills in the bathroom, meaning all the horrifying things he's seen and done were contained in his head up until he finally mentally defeated his addiction. All right before he died. But the doctors successfully revived him. After all of the pain and suffering David has been through, he wins over his addiction. He won't let it have control over his mind or his life anymore. It's a tragic but inspiring story, mainly crafted from what you make of it. Besides the ending cutscenes, minimal dialogue, and vague subliminal messaging, a lot of what I described in the story has been popular, non-canonical speculation and my own interpretation. Regardless of what you interpret, the story of Afraid of Monsters mostly appears tragic at first glance, but perhaps it's more inspiring than it is sad. One man alone conquered a mental mountain, with each of its thousands of ridges representing doubt and fear, all while his main horrible influence, his addiction, sat amongst a throne at the peak. The odds were more than stacked against him, but his mental prowess was strengthened to a point where not even death could stop him, which is a kind of adversity I believe to be timeless. After all of this, that man can start his road to recovery. In the end, that man's name was David Leatherhoff. Well, on a much less serious note, gameplay, which is ironically what I believe to contain the most hit or miss aspects of the game. The gameplay can remain fun and interesting, but there are points of Afraid of Monsters gameplay elements that need to be addressed, though just about every fucking one of them can be negative or subjective. Additionally, it doesn't help either that at the time of this video, the director's cut is 13 years old, which is a mod for a game that's 22 years old. To start off, the way this game presents cutscenes can be very cinematic and foreboding to some. However, to what I assume to be just about everyone else, the pacing of the majority of these cutscenes is not good. To be frank, they're slow as hell, and it's made so much worse when you do want to get all 4 endings and you have to sit through the same slow beginning cutscenes a minimum of 4 times. And that's if you're sure you've found all the hidden notes throughout each different playthrough. Another mostly negative point involves how generally dark the game is, coupled with the ineffective, annoying flashlight, which, on hard, you'll have barely any battery charge for throughout most of the game. For times when you have plenty of battery power, you'll have to get used to the way the Half-Life 1 style flashlight works and how it can barely illuminate jack shit, not giving you much of a clear picture of bigger objects, areas, or environments. For times when you don't have any battery power, you're going to be sitting in the dark waiting for the 1 or 2 points of natural battery recharge so you can have an extra 40 or so seconds of light to get through what could be another labyrinth of an area. Or you're going to be running in the dark forcefully until you hopefully find another natural light to help you see and kill enemies. I don't know how many times I've had to kill an enemy in the dark and the only light I had was the muzzle flash from my gun. In general, the lighting can be very terrible. Thirdly, speaking of lack of battery power, a big factor of this game is that it's a survival horror game, and it doesn't take the term survival horror very lightly. In this game, you have to be very vigilant and search through many additional areas and through many boxes and shelves to find every little bit of supplies you can, for any small advantage. And, at least on hard difficulty, even for veteran players like me who know all the gun, ammo, battery, and med locations, this game can still be nearly impossible to complete even one playthrough for, let alone 4 different ones. I absolutely love survival horror. It was an underrated genre that's finally getting a resurgence as of late, and one of the main influences on this game happens to be one of my favorite games of all time, being Resident Evil 1 Remake. But the way Afraid of Monsters spreads out its very small amount of supplies, mostly in strong, cardboard-looking boxes you'll be smacking out with your knife for much too long, is infuriating. Of course, this applies to all the possible supplies you can even get in this game, including what I said previously with ammo, batteries, and meds. You'll be more than just low on all of these supplies throughout the game, again, especially on hard difficulty. Fourthly, I want to move on to the collective of what I consider to be design-related problems, mainly with the maps and how they shape this game. Another small reminder that this is a Half-Life 1 mod, and it definitely plays like one, having many levels throughout that feel like a labyrinth of hallways, vents, doors, and scaffolds you have to rummage through and reluctantly venture down next, with most of these unconventional rat-like areas restricting your movement and your visibility of threats, with the game mainly exaggerating the compact and maze-like design that Half-Life can impose for some in a number of its sections. Furthermore, what Afraid of Monsters exaggerates on as well is the parkour aspect of Half-Life, but sometimes to a ludicrous degree, with both the hospital scaffold section and the garage elevator shaft section being the biggest example of this, utilizing annoying ladder hitboxes paired with pixel ledges and vents, all coupled with a hand creature blocking you out of a vent while a broken elevator descends down toward you to kill you. All these annoying tropes, especially when packed in a vacuum like the garage elevator section, can make this game much less accessible, which I hate to say since I enjoy experimentation in video games, but I think this level of gimmick could be out of quite a few people's reach. Instead of making annoying sections like this that your average player will die on constantly, who usually isn't technically inclined on Half-Life's unforgiving movement in the first place, whether they played the game or not, perhaps the elevator level could have been designed a bit more meticulously to make for more interesting parkour and escape routes. One thing I will give the game credit for in this regard, however, is the tutorial level that does teach and familiarize players with some key gameplay elements, and puzzle elements. Lastly, I wanted to address those puzzle elements of the game, with most of the puzzles involving either locked doors that require keys, locked doors that require button presses from another location, parkour, or more infrequently, kill arenas that require you to either hold off or kill all the enemies in the area to progress. The locked door dilemma gets very repetitive rather quickly, and kill arenas are especially annoying considering some of the areas aren't at all that open, and enemies are spammed into existence and thrown at you while you may not even have any ammo to fight them in the first place. In short, the puzzle aspect of the game is not as creative as it could have been, and especially for the kill arena parts, you'll probably be reloading saves from many minutes ago just to have enough ammo for those required fights. To wrap up talking about the gameplay elements, I'll be covering both the weapons and the enemies in the game. As far as the weapons go, unlike Half-Life 1, you can't carry God knows how many goddamn weapons in your HEV suit. Instead, you're able to equip a small but well-sizable arsenal. The 4 drop-down categories of weapons includes a melee weapon, a full-size handgun, a long gun or SMG, and a high-powered handgun, with you only being able to hold one of each at any given time. There's a good amount of variety when it comes to tactics with each category and with every single weapon, including in order of category the kitchen knife, the hammer, the fire axe, the Sig Sauer P226, the full auto Glock 18, the Beretta 92 FS, the pump action Benelli M3 Super 90, the IMI Uzi, the Heckler & Koch MP5K, the Magnum Research Desert Eagle, and the Colt Anaconda Revolver, with the addition of the infinite ammo Enfield L85A1 if you complete every ending of the game. Besides the, Easter egg L85A1, every single weapon you pick up will be vital in your survival. There are many different combinations of weapons and techniques that can be had to give you more of an edge against the monsters in this nightmare. All the weapons can be used in a general sense to defuse many situations, but if you use the weapons more tactfully against certain enemies, you'll come out with more ammo and less hassle, which is especially important in hard mode. Some of these general tactics include but are not limited to using your high-powered handgun only on big, high-health enemies, using your shotgun or SMG on hordes, using your full-size handgun on confrontations with few enemies, and using your melee weapon in one-on-one confrontations, or to finish off enemies that have been hit a few times before. Along with, of course, hitting for the head on most enemies when you can. Furthermore, I wanted to mention that especially in hard mode, the pump shotgun and especially the kitchen knife are generally quite terrible. Saying having the kitchen knife is better than nothing is like saying you have money when you only have a nickel. Other than that, overall, the dynamic with weapons, especially in a survival horror such as this, is tactful and remains interesting. Moving on, much like the noticeable variety of weapons in the game, it also has quite a variety of different enemies with unique ways of tricking and killing the player. Even though a lot of the enemies have similar patterns and clear inspirations from the aliens of Half-Life 1, the monsters in this game have much deadlier tricks up their sleeves. These enemies include the Twitcher, being the most common enemy, the Hand Crab, the Spitter Twitcher, the Weird Face Dog, the Flying Face, the Bleeding Spectre, the Mouth Monster, and finally what I call the Amalgamation, which has no HL1 equivalent I can think of. With all these enemies grouped together in the same harsh, claustrophobic environments of the game, it creates a recipe for a truly horrific experience, though it's one that'll make you think, plan, and always watch your back. To finish off this section, I just want to address the fact that it appears as if I'm mostly ragging on this game's gameplay elements, and it may appear as if I hate the gameplay or the game really does play terribly, but that's not true. On easy and normal difficulty, I believe this game plays well, and many others looking for a unique survival horror experience might also concur. A number of the gripes listed apply mostly to hard difficulty, which I did play on 4 times to get all 4 endings for the video clips being shown. For some, the game can come off quite gimmicky or repetitive, but I believe the fast pacing and variety in mapping, enemies, weapons, and puzzles far outweighs the negatives. Additionally, I think it's crucial to note that all of these factors, with the environments being dark, the enemies being unforgiving, supplies being scarce to all hell, having no allies you ever run to, it all comes together into something very special. All the factors described previously with story and gameplay, they all weave together to make one of the most unique atmospheres throughout the entire game's runtime. Afraid of Monsters never lets up on its haunting, oppressive, claustrophobic, and foreboding atmosphere. There are many layers of both subtle and more obvious disturbing occurrences happening around the player in this twisted, dark reality, kicking off after the first daunting nightmare sequence. All built up slowly at first in the beginning hospital sections and launching off exponentially after the hospital power is shut off, with David growing more sick as you progress through the many different harsh environments in the game. There are many factors that build up the game's unique ambience, such as the accuracy and variety in map design. Form over function is definitely a concept kept in mind when levels such as the hospital, subway systems, sewer systems, and many city levels were created, making for a more immersive experience, especially when compared to the more chaotic levels that serve as physical portrayals of David's maddening psyche as he moves further. Speaking of which, you can't mention the level design without mentioning how the game literally looks. Just stop for a moment and look at these textures. They aren't that great, even for 2007 standards. However, I believe the grittier and uglier lighting, colors, and textures only give this game more teeth. There's just something about the general look of this game that makes you feel more alienated and uncomfortable, even when you have plenty of light and there aren't any enemies around. Around each and every corner, you just think there's going to be something there, but usually there isn't. You don't know what lies in the darkness. I believe it also plays into that retro phenomenon of it being more uncanny because it doesn't represent real life nearly as much, with all these kind of quote-unquote, ugly textures and old game designs and etc. Some people, I guess, could pass this off with the less detail in the textures being David making less sense of his surroundings, but I'm not going to go that far. However, I will say that the more outdated look of the game for the most part does give it an advantage. Again, making you feel more dissociated and alone. Furthermore, I want to emphasize again how the dichotomy between the looks of the regular levels and the looks of the nightmare levels is very unsettling, as if there's a strong, sinister force at work in David's mind, pulling the strings, to which there is. With appearances still in mind, the look of all the monsters are not only unfriendly and unsettling, but they blend with the bleak environments well, along with serving as further portrayals to what David's mind fabricates, with the majority of the enemies, the Twitchers, mainly looking like average people with distorted and exaggerated features. As for the guns and other weapons, all I have to say is they look good and their animations are solid. Moving forward, it'd really be a crime if I were to talk about the ambience of this game and not mention the plethora of music and custom sounds that are utilized. The game certainly wouldn't be the same without them, from the horrific, tortured sounds of the enemies to the haunting, fluorescent buzzes and backdrops of the many city levels, the banging of a monster outside of the vent you're desperately crawling out of, or the mere sound of silence with the rustle of the trees and the gentle breeze. It all makes for such an unparalleled sonic palette that's utilized masterfully throughout the game. It's a major highlight of this game, really creating a setting of its own as a survival horror. As for the music, most of it was made by Andreas Romberg, while the other more discernible tracks earlier in the game and later in the credits are from Aphex Twin and from 9 Inch Nails. The music blends well with the environment that they were going for, and I honestly wouldn't want it any other way. Overall, the atmosphere is definitely one of the greatest things about this game. I have nothing negative to say about it, other than a gripe with the small amount of cheap screamers here and there, which is a big immersion breaker and is counterintuitive to the idea of building up a haunting, foreboding setting. The very idea of a quick screamer just irritates me to death, as it does to some others who are fans of horror, with it again being very cheap and short-winded compared to that of a genuinely horrific experience, which thankfully is what you'll mostly experience with Afraid of Monsters. Again, having one of the most unique atmospheres in survival horror that brings all of its elements together. In the end, Afraid of Monsters is a lot of things. It's a survival horror Half-Life 1 mod, like I've said 1,000 times, but it's also an intriguing redemption story of a man overcoming and fighting through his inner demons, mainly stemming from his addiction. It's an inspiring, fun, scary, and atmospheric game that would serve as an important learning experience for Team Speak-Scalar's next critically acclaimed title, Cry of Fear, which is another beast all on its own. Afraid of Monsters, along with Cry of Fear, will remain one of my favorite games of all time. I personally find its vague story and harsh environments as unique and inspiring as the games that inspired it, all along with the fast-paced gameplay, the interesting level design, and I think I've gone on about it enough. If you've watched up to this point, I greatly appreciate it. A big thanks too to the one and only MamaMax as well for voicing David. Go check him out, he makes awesome videos. This production marks the beginning of my journey to making more stylized, researched, and analytical content. I do this mostly for fun, though I also do this to grow as a writer, and I would greatly appreciate your feedback. If you're interested, I've opened my official public Discord server where you can provide criticism, video suggestions, or just hang out and meet new people. I'd be happy to talk to you all. The link is in the description. Once again, thank you for watching. Bigger things are coming, and we're only going up from here. I'll see you next time.